All right, so the session is preparing to go live. My name is Dr. Bertha Sewa Ai. I am the chairman of the webinar committee for the Old Girls Association of Wesley Girls High School. And it's my great delight to welcome you to the third session of the webinar series that we've been having on the dynamics of unhealthy relationships. It's been an exciting 3 weeks of impacting many lives. Over 600 people have accessed our first YouTube link. Over 200 have also accessed our second YouTube link. And we've had over 200 people participating at each session. And the feedback we've had has been phenomenal. Lives have been changed, including mine, and I believe many others who are panelists and helpers and whatnot. And I know that today is going to be a wonderful grand finale, because instead of talking about problems, we're going to talk about healing. And so today's session, the title is How to Heal After Unhealthy Relationships. Our previous speakers have included Dr. Mr. Adolf Awuku-Bekwin, Dr. Naniwata from the police department. We've had a very Reverend Ama Afuble. We've had Honorable Diana Dapa, and today we also have a wonderful panel of speakers who would be addressing how to heal after unhealthy relationships. We have Dr. Jifa Abrahata, an old girl. We also have Professor Ifwa Hesse, who is also an old girl from class of 1969, and Professor Angela Furyata from class of 1978, who will be addressing us today. So please fasten your seatbelts and know that you're going to have a good time. We will be sharing the YouTube link in very shortly. So a few ground rules. I'm co-moderating with Mrs. Samantha Proja, who is based in the UK. Samantha, can you give a shout out?
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Samantha Prosser, and I'm a member of the webinar committee and also the president for the OGA UK and Ireland, and it's delightful to be here once again. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. And so this week we have a survivor story to share, which will be read after the first speaker's Q&A session. Please be patient with us as this is Zoom. There could be a few Wi-Fi issues. For the audience, there's no video access. However, we have the power to enable your video and audio if you so request, either by raising your hands or something comes up. Each speaker would be speaking for approximately 15 minutes. We will introduce them, and then it will be followed by a brief 5-minute Q&A session just to break things up. It's not the only time for question and answers. And after they speak, we would have the chat function where you can submit your questions or put it in the Q&A section. And finally, there'll be about 30 to 45 minutes for answering questions between myself and my co-moderator. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Jifa Abrahata. So Jifa is in the 1999 year group. She has over 11 years of clinical experience working with children, adolescents, and young adults. She currently works as a lecturer and licensed clinical psychologist at the Department of Psychiatry, University of Ghana Medical School, Legon. She holds a PhD in psychology, specifically in public mental health, from Stellenbosch University in South Africa. She also has a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology and an MPhil in clinical psychology, both from the University of Ghana, Legon. For her PhD, she conducted really groundbreaking research on the lived experiences of child sexual abuse in a local Ghanaian community. In this piece, she writes about the participants' unsettling stories of sexual abuse, as well as her own experience of sexual harassment during and after the data collection phase of the study. Among other findings, her work sheds light on the cultural experiences of children in Ghana, which mandates collective effort to foster and promote healthy child development. As a professional, she seeks to add her voice to the fight against abuse or violence in any form. She has a keen interest in trauma and loss, and specifically works with vulnerable populations, including girls and women that have suffered sexual abuse. Using trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, She's worked with several sexual abuse survivors on their journey to recovery. So please help me warmly welcome Dr. Jifa Abrahata. Thank you for joining us.
Okay. Good evening, everybody, depending upon where you're from. It's an honor to be here today to discuss a very important and relevant issue for all of us. I'm particularly excited because I'm an old girl, part of the 99-year group. So a big hello to the 99-year group. Today, I'm going to talk about trauma and recovery, and this has to do with the aftermath of domestic violence. And it's an important topic to, discuss. We started off by looking at the red flags of unhealthy relationships from courting and then to marriage. And in our second session, we looked at how to help in how to seek help in an unhelpful relationship. And then today we'll be looking at how to heal after recognizing or healing or leaving an unhelpful relationship. Now, it's important to really consider what happens after you experience domestic violence. Now, anybody who makes that decision to leave an abusive relationship is making a transition. So it's making a shift from being in the survival mode to starting a new life altogether. And this comes with a lot of, it's a change, and any change comes with adjusting. And if you recall from the past series that we've had, and we've talked about how usually the survivor loses control here. And we're moving from losing control to more of being in control. And this also comes with you having to cope with the cost of domestic violence, including the experience of trauma. And it's important that we talk a bit about trauma so you understand what trauma means. Now, trauma is said to be the emotional response to an adverse event or a series of adverse events. Now, you would agree with me that for somebody who has experienced domestic violence, they've been exposed multiple times to events that are adverse. Now, usually these events are perceived as physically or emotionally harmful, and they could be life-threatening and then also overwhelming for the individual, such that it has a lasting impact on their ability to function. So the ability to relate with others, the ability to work, or even the ability to be productive in school. And it's important for us to understand that anybody who has experienced domestic violence may be struggling with that adjustment or coping with their new circumstances. Now, imagine somebody who has experienced domestic violence. Now, their sense of security has been affected in many ways than one. And in a situation like that, survivors may feel helpless, emotionally numb, and then disconnected from people. They may also be struggling with a lot of emotions and memories of the distressing or unpleasant event of domestic violence. And this can also cause some sort of anxiety. As a result of what they have experienced, it may also affect their ability to trust people. So these are some of the things that an individual may be experiencing. But there's something that we should note, that trauma is actually a normal reaction to an abnormal event. That's something we should understand. Our bodies are made such that there are certain ways in which we respond when we are going through something that is life-threatening. So it is normal that somebody may be experiencing certain or maybe having certain memories about this unpleasant, situation. It is normal that the person may be avoiding certain things, or the way in which they think may change, or the way in which they behave may change. So I just want to go through a bit of it, and just to be able to help you relate to it. Over the past 2 weeks, if you've been participating in these series of webinars, you would realize that just listening to some of the stories, right, may cause you to feel extremely distressed and uncomfortable. In those instances, you may also be experiencing some sort of trauma as you have listened, or you've been exposed to some extent to some of these distressing events, although you didn't experience it directly. Now, sometimes as a result of being being somebody who has gone through domestic violence, you may have intrusive memories about the distressing event. So you have these recurrent memories just popping up into your head, and it's very difficult for you to kind of control them. Sometimes it's as if you are reliving some of those distressing events. So let's say you were slapped or you were beaten by somebody, you may begin to have flashbacks. And sometimes people have, dreams or nightmares that have themes related to some of your experiences, some of the experiences you went through. Now, another thing that also occurs is that people reacting towards things that remind them of the stressful event. So you may find that individuals that experience trauma may not even want to talk about the event, because just talking about it is as if you're exposing them again to that traumatic event. So they will just avoid talking about it. Sometimes when you ask them to narrate their stories, they may not even be able to remember some relevant aspects of the traumatic event or the experience of domestic violence. You may find that they may avoid going to certain places. So let's say they used to go to certain places with their spouse. You find that they avoid going to such places. They avoid doing activities that maybe they used to do with that particular individual. Anything that may kind of remind them of the abuse or violence they experience. Another thing that happens is that there may be changes in the way they begin to think and changes in their mood. And all of this is negative. So you may find that the way they think about themselves is usually negative. So some of them may say, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe there's something wrong with me. So they begin to question themselves, or they begin to question others. People cannot be trusted, or they begin to question what's in this world for me. So they may appear as being extremely hopeless about the future because of their experiences. Some individuals may be struggling with memory. And you may find that they may also have difficulty maintaining close relationships because of their experiences. Sometimes you may be in a room with them, but they seem as if they are detached. They may also have a loss in things that they used to enjoy. They may not enjoy doing them anymore. And they may also have difficulty experiencing positive emotions. Another thing that also happens is that you may find there may be changes in their physical and emotional reactions. So you may find that people who are traumatized are easily startled at the least noise. They're always on guard, as if something is just waiting for something to happen, thinking that something bad would happen. You may also find them engaging in self-destructive behavior. So you may find them driving recklessly or drinking and driving, things like that. They may also have trouble sleeping or trouble concentrating. You may also find that individuals struggling with trauma may become irritable, angry, or they may exhibit aggressive behavior. They may also experience overwhelming guilt and shame as a result of what they have experienced. Now, although trauma is a normal response, it becomes a disorder if after a period of 1 month where you were exposed to that particular event, you're still experiencing some of these symptoms, then we can actually say that it may have developed into a disorder. And there's some statistics to show that 31 to 84% of people who have experienced domestic violence exhibit post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is something that is important to note. And your experience of post-traumatic stress disorder may be complicated by the number of events, negative events that you may have experienced. It may also be complicated by maybe the age at which you started experiencing that abusive behavior. So some people may have experienced domestic violence as a child throughout adolescence to when they started intimate relationships. Sometimes depending upon the severity of the abuse or the extent of the abuse or the type of abuse. Remember that there's sexual, there's verbal, there's emotional, there's physical. So all of these can actually complicate the sort of symptoms somebody may present with. But what we should realize is that the recovery is possible. And I think that's one of the things that we want to emphasize today. Recovery is possible. Now, one of the things that happens is that as a result of domestic violence, the person may have had their social systems affected, the experience of care, protection. Imagine if this was somebody you met and he was like your knight in shining armor, and all of a sudden he's actually the one who is causing you harm. So you can actually see that in a situation like this, the person's social system of care, protection, is sort of impaired now. It's been destroyed, or they've been robbed of it. Now, usually what happens with recovery is that it requires a reconstruction of these systems. And something you should note, and it's extremely important when you're dealing with survivors, is that role of empowerment. Because remember, because of their experiences, a lot of power has been taken away from them. So one of the things that is important to understand when it comes to recovery is that they being able to gain or establish a sense of safety, but then also being empowered in that particular process, extremely important. And it's a key process during recovery. So empowerment is extremely important, and then also the restoration of relationships. Now, there's one thing that a lot of people may misunderstand. They don't understand why. Okay, so if you're experiencing abuse, why are you still remaining in the relationship? And sometimes you may actually get upset with the person for still remaining there. Now, as a result of the recovery, you may be able to restore some of these relationships that may have become impaired. Now, I just want to briefly talk about a theory that was developed by Judith Herman. So she spoke about 3 stages of recovery. The first one being safety and stabilization, then remembrance and mourning, then reconnection and integration. So I'll just go through them briefly. Now, it's important that a survivor is able to establish a sense of safety. You realize that if somebody is traumatized, they don't feel safe. And so one of the things that is extremely important and a starting point when it comes to recovery is being able to establish a sense of safety. Now, this doesn't only demand being able to identify a safe place physically, but then sometimes somebody will say, well, I didn't think my body belonged to me. So you also have to help the individual gain some sense of control about their body. So you realize that they are not sleeping like they should, they're not dressing up like they should, their emotions are extremely intense. And one of the things that is extremely helpful here is being able to help them develop or being able to control their emotions. So being able to regulate their emotions is extremely important here. This is a point where they have to make extremely difficult life choices. And in making those life choices, they will actually lose their homes for some people. They may actually lose friends, and they may actually lose their livelihood. This is a reality for many women. Now, once you've been able to establish some sense of, safety, and then you're sort of stabilized, then it moves on to the next stage of remembrance and mourning. It is extremely difficult for survivors to talk about their experience of trauma. But the moment they're able to tell their story, the moment they're able to start assigning words to what they experience, the moment they're able to make sense of what they experience, it's extremely healing for them. To the extent that even though in the past they may talk about it and may experience very intense emotions, it gets to a point where the event itself loses its hold because the person is now regaining some amount of control. Now, it's also important to allow the person to mourn their losses. So it's almost like grieving, because you may have invested a lot with the partner. So these are all processes that a professional can kind of help you through. Now, the last stage is reconnection and integration. So this is where the survivor recognizes the impact of what they went through, and they're able to understand that, well, trauma is not my entire story, it's part of my story. It doesn't define them, so they begin to redefine themselves, creating a new sense of self and creating a new future. Now, one of the things, sometimes when you talk about it, we kind of simplify it. But one of the things we should note, like anything in life, there may be some negative turning points as you're trying to make that transition. So what it may lead to a temporary loss of adaptive functioning, but it doesn't mean that you still not be able to continue with your recovery. There are also some positive turning points that can significantly help you improve. Now, it's about learning how to manage these unpleasant, thoughts and emotions you had about your past, making sense about what happened, and then moving forward. And one of the things that we realize is that social support, so your significant others, your friends, and then spiritual support is extremely instrumental to a participant or to a survivor's recovery, their personal growth, and then also their resilience. So these are some of the things that are extremely helpful for a survivor as they make a recovery. So I just want to remind us all that there is hope in case you're a survivor, you're just coming out of a relationship where you feel that all is lost. Of course, sometimes abuse can have lifelong an impact, but the severity of it can be lessened if you get help. There are many people who have experienced various forms of abuse, but they have also found healing and meaningful connections in healthy relationships. And this is where I would want to end by just encouraging you that if others have been able to do it, so can you. So I'll end here for questions.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Jifata. That was comprehensive, and it gives us so much information, but also most importantly, the sense of hope that we can repair after these traumatic situations. So, if there is anyone in the audience who have any questions, could you type something into the chat? Otherwise, what we'll do is we will move on to the next stage, and then we will, obviously there'll be questions for Dr. Atta, so we'll come back to it. So I think, okay, so I can see one here. Someone says, thank you so much. Do you think blocking the abuse for memory helps with recovery?
Sorry, Samantha, could you say that again?
Okay, do you think blocking the abuse for memory, I think what they mean is blocking the abuse from your memory, does that help with recovery?
No, it doesn't help. You may block it, but at some point, it may be triggered by some particular event, and then you go back to the same mood. So it's always important to get help. It's rather, and that's why there are specific treatments that are extremely helpful. So I'll mention the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which basically focuses on helping that individual tell their story, but telling their story in a way that they are supported. So usually what you would do is to empower the client first, by giving them coping skills. So if I'm talking about this distressing event, right? Just thinking about it makes me feel angry, right? We teach them various ways to regulate these emotions before actually telling the story. So before you start telling the story, we kind of give you the skills to actually deal with these distressing emotions as you speak about them. But if you tend to block it and you don't want to talk about it, you find that maybe temporarily it works, but then something happens and then it triggers a reaction. So it's best to rather confront it. It may be I must say that it may be uncomfortable in the beginning, and that's why it's helpful for you to work with a professional, and then who could also support your caregivers or your families, to kind of support you through the recovery process.
Thank you. So now we've got a few more coming in. So he said, is it not the case that some women return back to the perpetrator because leaving can be very difficult?
Yes, I mean, certainly it's extremely difficult, and there's also some resistance there, because you can imagine somebody may be married for, let's say, close to 20 years. And I mean, for 20 years, there must have been a lot of investment. There may be children, you may have built businesses together. It's extremely difficult, but more so for individuals who are more of dependent on the person who is perpetrating the abuse. So yes, you find that people are going back because it's difficult for them. And they may also not get enough support. So you realize that for some people, the experience of trauma is complicated by a lack of support. So you definitely need support in order to be able to recover for something like this.
Okay. And then the next one is, what if the abuse was from an older sibling or someone in authority over you, like a teacher? Should you confront them?
Well, the thing about confronting, I would say that would more want to focus on you as the individual and help you deal with your experience of abuse rather than confronting the person, because the person could, I mean, you confront the person and the person's reaction towards you may even make it worse. So it's rather building resilience in you to be able to deal with anything.
Yeah. And then the last one for now is where there are children, it is even more difficult to move on as the children are likely to always have that person in their lives. So how do you deal with that?
I think it's extremely complex because that person definitely may be as a parent to the children, but there are many people who have used the children as an excuse and they haven't lived to see today. So the thing is being able to recognize that, yes, there'll be costs as a result of this event of domestic violence. Some of it, yes, may have negative implications for the children, but that's why it's important to also not only consider yourself as you go through recovery, because it also means different things for the children, right? So it's important, and it's an extremely complex situation. So you need to make sure that you're addressing all the needs. And one of it is, of course, that aspect. You may not be able to necessarily prevent the children from seeing, the parent, but you should be able to support them through that process so that in that sense, they are also protected. See?
And I guess I could squeeze in one more before we move on to the next item. Some people say abusers can change. But how do we know the person we're sending a woman back to has truly changed? This is quite an important one, because a lot of time people, one of the first things we do is say, well, go back and forgive and the rest of it. So how do we know that that person we're sending the woman back to has truly changed?
Yeah, I think it's extremely difficult because the individual can actually pretend and then it goes back to the cycle, especially if that person, I mean, there's also some research or some literature that talks about how people who perpetrate abuse may have also experienced some abuse themselves. So this is what they have observed, as a child. So it's extremely complex and difficult. So you may not necessarily be able to tell unless you've kind of lived with this person for a particular period of time. But those are extremely difficult, decisions to kind of make. And I'm sure before you make that decision to leave such a relationship, you would have considered, the odds and all of that. And most usually what happens is when there's that separation, right? And they're setting, if that person agrees to go through therapy, there's also that period of transitioning back, to, but not in all cases, because for a lot of people that make that decision to leave, and it means that it's got to the extreme, and so, but pretty difficult situations here to kind of, deal with it. That's why it's extremely difficult for a lot of people to leave, considering all of these things, especially if they don't have people standing by them to help make them make the correct or right decisions.
Yes, but I'm guessing that what this is almost saying is that quite often the person who has been abused has already kind of either escaped or made that decision to step away, and then they're being sent back, by either their mother or family or friends or something like that, and the friends don't. I think it's a difficult question. I can see that, because they don't know whether they're doing the right thing. They don't know. Yeah. Anyway, well, thank you so much, Dr. Jifa Abrahata. This is a section that was a good one to start with, because it leads us very neatly into the next section, which is the survivor story. And I'm going to take over from here. So as part of this discussions in our webinar series, we wanted to find a survivor whose story that we could tell in this final session on how to heal. The idea is that this is to give us some hope and that there is some light after the darkness. Okay. It's worth noting, and even Dr. Jifa Abrahata has said this, that not many are comfortable with telling their stories. So we're extremely grateful to our survivor. On Tuesday, the 20th of July, I interviewed this young woman who was referred to me as someone who is willing to tell her story. We have agreed to give her anonymity, so her name and personal information will not be revealed. For the purposes of this webinar, I will refer to her as Ikuya. Okay. So Ikuya met her partner through mutual friends while they were both at university. And they dated. She was then 24. For a couple of years they dated before they got married. And as far as she can recall, there were no red flags in the early days, although in hindsight, she realizes that he didn't have a good relationship with his mother. So about a year into the marriage, she noticed a change in the tone of his conversations. There seemed to be an inability to understand her. This was the beginning of the conflicts. She couldn't exactly pinpoint to the first incident, because with abuse, you don't start off knowing what's going on. However, there were more arguments based on finances, mainly around financial control. With separate bank accounts, he wanted to know what was in her account and wasn't prepared to share the details in his. His focus had turned to the child benefit and tax credits that she received from the government towards the upkeep of the children, which he wanted for himself. He kept pushing for the bank details to be changed to his officially so that he could receive the money directly. She stood her ground on this. And he would even use emotional blackmail to have access to the money she had received from her parents. He didn't like her speaking to her parents and was quite jealous of her relationship with her mother. So the arguments then developed into physical abuse, which became more frequent, and she was beaten on multiple occasions, pushed into a door while she carried a baby on her back. He caused her marks around her neck and kicked her and slapped her. On one occasion, he slapped her so hard that she lost her hearing for a couple of months. Eventually, she learned to always have a phone on her to call for help, and also know that she had to escape into a room that could be locked. And she was always treading on eggshells, trying not to cause any situation that would set him off. They had neighbors who knew about the abuse and had intervened numerous times, sometimes by phoning them during the abuse. Their banging on the door interrupted the beating. They didn't report her husband, as they were aware of the consequences that would have on him, and strongly pointed that out. They just hoped that he would change, but he never did. Ikuya herself did not report any of the abuse to the authorities, and friends from the Ghanaian community did not encourage her to report the incidents either, due to their African perspective on issues of this nature. So what actually broke the cycle? Interestingly, it wasn't Ikuya finally reporting her husband that brought things to a head. By then, she was a mother of 3, with the youngest being a baby. During an argument in the early hours, which invariably escalated, her husband slapped and kicked her while she had the baby in her arms. Their neighbors arrived in their nightclothes to intervene. However, unknown to Ikuya, their 5-year-old son had witnessed it all, and subsequently told his teacher when he went to school later that morning. 2 days later, the health visitor came on a routine visit to see Ikuya and the baby, as is normal, and informed her that social services were now aware of the situation going on at home. This was because the school had actually reported the incident to the authorities based on the account given by their son. This was a surprise to Ikea, as he hadn't even told her that he'd mentioned the incident to his teacher at all. And why would he? He was only 5, so he had no idea of the significance of what he had started. And even then, Ikea downplayed it all to the authorities, saying that there had been an argument, but that the husband had now temporarily moved out of the family home. However, this was to eventually become the crucial evidence used in court, as she had failed to report any of the abuse previously. Without this, she wouldn't have had any recorded evidence, because everything that's cited is considered to be an allegation. So her husband initially filed for divorce without her knowledge during the marriage, with the intention of marrying someone else for the purposes of documentation. As this had not been discussed, Ikea objected, and he threatened on several occasions that he was going to make her life a living hell if she didn't sign the papers. After family got involved, he put that on hold. And at the time, Ikea was not financially in the position to pay the court fees. So her immediate concern was to move away and settle the children before considering making the divorce application. Eventually, Ikea left the relationship and moved away. She was then 5 weeks pregnant with her 4th child and went through the pregnancy on her own with 3 young children. But she had realized then that after giving him all the opportunities to change, he wasn't going to, and the marriage wasn't a healthy one for her and the children. He then filed for divorce, citing unreasonable behavior, which she couldn't challenge after being advised that it was pointless due to the legal system. It became apparent that he was divorcing Ikea to marry her best friend, who was actually an ex-girlfriend of his. It later transpired that he'd been having a relationship with the best friend during the entire period of their marriage. And as the best friend mounted pressure on him to get divorced, the abuse towards Ikea increased, as did his hatred for her. They eventually got divorced, and he then filed a child arrangement application. All the time this was going on, Ikea had continued studying and had already added a master's degree to her first degree. This time round, she was studying for a master's in law, which was particularly helpful as she represented herself in court. The crucial evidence from her 5-year-old son played a part in her story being believed by the judge. The court ruled that for him to have contact with the children, he had to go on an anger management course, which he refused to do. So eventually, the case was stood down after he asked for it to be closed. So we're on to the healing process. Ikea is doing well. She told me that she cried a lot during the initial stages and prayed to God to remove the hurt and pain that she was going through. Among other things, she asked God to help her forgive her ex-husband. She prayed for doors to open for her and truly believes that God positioned people to help her. Finding a new home to move into, finding employment, and the right person to help her with the children so that she could continue with her studies were all miracles. Her message is that there is a need to forgive so that you can let go and move on. If you don't forgive, you cut off your blessings. She prays for her ex-husband and doesn't speak negatively about him to her kids. When the kids ask questions about him, and this is very rare, she explains things to them in an age-appropriate manner and emphasizes that we all make mistakes in life, and that's why God requires us to forgive one another. She will not hold someone hostage in her heart, and her faith remains strong. Ikea's strength was also backed by her knowledge. She went to a lot of trouble to understand how the law worked. She always wanted to learn and not feel vulnerable or disadvantaged because she didn't have the finances to get the legal representation. She'd like to show her gratitude to God and appreciates the lessons learned. She says, "Know your worth." We are now in a different age where we are too educated to allow this to continue. Think about the children. What they see, they learn. What they hear, they learn. The environment that they grow up in plays a huge part in what they become. The longer you stay, the longer you end up breeding monsters. Ikuya says she's now a better parent because she knows that God has given her the mandate of raising these children. She has become intentional in her parenting and is bringing up happy children. I would say that Ikuya's determination and resilience came through very clearly in the interview. She's a woman who has fought back by showing strength, resilience, perseverance, and courage. And we would like to thank her for sharing her story and hope that it goes some way in helping others to know that there is hope. Thank you. So we will, at some point, we will come back to discuss this. We're hoping that actually as our speakers go through that they will come back and refer to the survivor's story. But in essence, it's a way to help us think as we're talking about the healing process. So I will now go on to introduce our second speaker. No, actually I'm not. I'm actually handing over now to Dr. Bertha Ayi to introduce
All right, thank you, Mrs. Samantha Prosher, for the effort and time you put into getting that survivor story and to sharing that poignant story with us. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. For those of you who live in Ghana, I'm sure she's no stranger to you. And to all the old girls listening to us, Professor Angio Furyata is in class of 1978. And yesterday I learned some really interesting trivia that her mother was also an old girl of Wesley Girls High School, and actually the first female pilot of Ghana, Miss Melody Dankwa. So that was exciting. Mrs. Oforiata is the head of the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Ghana Medical School and Kolebu Teaching Hospital. At the beginning of her career, she helped to train policemen and women in gender matters and best practices in the handling of domestic violence. And she implanted these principles in the training of medical students at UGMS. I remember she taught me before too. When she set up Youth Watch for AIDS in the 1990s, she again inculcated these principles in the training of junior high school students as she gave them assertiveness skills to avoid early sexuality. Today, Prof. Angie's weekly show on Asasi Radio aims to strengthen the resilience of listeners in all matters psychological. Angie is married to the Honorable Minister of Finance, with whom Honorable Ken Oforiata, with whom she has raised 4 adorable young adults. And so please help me warmly welcome Professor Oforiata.
Angie, you're muted.
Prof, I think you're on mute.
Oh, so sorry. Very happy to be here. Thank you very much for your kind words. So I'll just go right ahead and share with you my screen. I hope we have the class of 78 here to support me through this. And I'm going to have a hard time because Dr. Atta did such a great job with her presentation. I'll have to sort of glean between the cracks, and there were very few cracks in that presentation. Great job, Doc. So I would like to begin my presentation with the journey. So the first thing is recognizing that this is an abusive relationship that you're in, that it is time to leave. And when you leave, it's not the end of it. It's time to begin or continue the healing process. Because recognition of abuse is actually, I would say, the first step of healing. I know there was a little bit of a discussion with Dr. Atta about should we be sending the woman back, and how do we know it's not going to be more abuse? I would say that the research is very definite about if there has been physical abuse, if there is terrible verbal abuse, it's time to leave. Some people are radical enough to say after the first slap, don't wait, just leave. And then it would be, how would you know whether to go back or not? Well, the warning is not to go back. If you want to give it a try, the perpetrator has to go for healing himself or herself. The perpetrator needs to begin the process of learning new behaviors before one can even begin to think of going back. And I know it's a radical point of view. So before, and like I said, recognizing is the first step. Leaving has an ecosystem all around it, and Dr. Ta talked about it. But I want to sort of take you back to our survivor's story, which is, you know, it's kind of typical. Who is advising you to leave? And what are their motives? In this story, these were neighbors who were advising her. They weren't advising a survivor to leave. They were saying, they were probably saying things like, don't make him angry, call us when there is a fight, we will come up as quickly as we can. And their motives were pure, it would seem. They wanted to protect Equia. And she didn't have any other support systems, it seems. She didn't have anywhere to go, although she seems to have had a mom who sent her money, parents who supported her. And the question was, when do you, in the chat, the question was, when do you get help? And I would say sooner rather than later. As soon as the abuse begins, it's the time to either walk away or get help. And when you're doing that, you need to think about, like Ikua did, financial, emotional support. Ikua took herself to school, got a master's even in law to defend herself in court. That is amazing. And then you have to really think of your security. When somebody is able to hit you, you know, and to abuse you to the point where you have nothing left of yourself, you really want to put things in place to make sure that you're secure. If they are kids, they are secure. Put a lot of distance between you and the abuser, and a lot of security barriers, if you like, between you and the abuser. Dr. Ta alluded to the effects of toxic relationships, and I'd like to go over a few of them. Physical, if the abuse is physical, you know that our survivor had her hearing impairment for weeks. It's important to get some physical help, some medical help for that. You and your doctor need to be friends in this matter. Maybe you and your dentist, because your jaws, your teeth might be affected. So you do need to make sure that physically you're okay. And remember, these are the things that build up evidence for you when you're strong enough to walk away. There are emotionally toxic effects on you. There's psychological, you're thinking about yourself. There are psychiatric consequences because you may end up with depression, you may end up with the trauma that Doc talked about, you may end up with dissociative experiences and so on. And these effects may be short-term, they may go away soon if you're resilient, if your past has not been filled with toxic relationships, or they may be long-term. Now, there are other experiences of survivors, or shall I say people who suffered abuse, that are germane or important to the therapeutic process. And Doc mentioned the person who suffered the abuse may have a great sense of guilt, of shame for being treated the way they are, and blame themselves for it. Survivors, and so, I mean, these are all things that are important for the therapeutic process, the things that you tackle with your counselor or with your therapist. Survivors frequently take personal responsibility for their abuse. I'm being abused because I like to talk back, or I don't work, or I'm fully dependent on my husband or my abuser, or there's nothing attractive about me. I'm not smart. I'm not clever. And this kind of self-talk it might keep a survivor or the abused person right where the abuse is. It's important to explore the early primary relationships of the abused person in the context of abuse. For example, was there an abusive parent? Did you observe a parent being abused? Was it physical? Was it verbal? Was it sexual? Or was it all of that? And does this present toxic relationship remind you of that? Did it make you vulnerable to the current abuse? And I ask these questions of all of us on the platform, because the answers to these questions may be key to explaining why people who experience abuse stay where they are. And they're very key to what we do in therapy. And so we know that there are trust issues. We know that there's a fear of intimacy, fear of being different or being weird, difficulty establishing interpersonal boundaries. And that's really key in the current abuse situations. For example, the boundary is between a husband and a wife or partners, is around partners, but suddenly there may be children who are also being abused and who we can't take out of the boundary between the man and the woman. There may be, in this case, there was an interloper, a friend who had abused trust and was now sleeping with the husband, making things worse. And so it's really important to think through these issues. Getting involved, is one getting involved in abusive relationships again after one has let oneself out of the first? And is there depression? Is there a dissociation? Like Dr. Atath talked about, extreme anxiety to do with the past trauma. Where shall we begin? Now in therapy, the treatment goals, let's just say that the three most important treatment goals we should be looking out for would be to eliminate or reduce the impact of the symptoms on the abused person's daily functioning. We should also aim to teach acceptance of self and independence. I too am a person. I deserve respect. I do not deserve the abuse that I got. And then we need to build resilience and teach coping strategies to manage the stress and anxieties. And of course, all of these are easier said than done. But we take it a step at a time. Psychoeducation is important. What do normal relationships look like? What do abusive relationships look like? who is responsible for their own emotions? Certainly, the abused is not responsible for the abuser's emotions. Even if the abused made the abuser angry, the abuser is responsible for their own emotions. They cannot blame the abused. So that's what the psychoeducation is about. It's also about helping you know where to source help from, who to go to for help, what services are available. And so all of that can happen even as the person recognizes the abuse, even before they leave the abusive situation. Psychoeducation is important. And these days you can go online and get it. If you don't have access to a counselor, if you don't have access to a church, you can get this online. Then a counselor helps you make practical decisions on your support and safety. We help with relearning, coping, and calming skills. Dr. Tat talked about the importance of stabilizing a person's emotions, having come through such a traumatic experience. And then we know that for depression and even for anxiety, cognitive behavior therapy is thought to be the treatment of choice. And the underlying basis of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, is that thoughts and emotions are very closely linked. And once you listen to your thoughts and you understand that your thoughts do not necessarily represent the truth of the world around you, you can begin to challenge your own thoughts. The emotions actually are red flags for you to go back and ask yourself, why did I experience these emotions? What was I thinking? And then you will see the thoughts. And I would challenge all of you to go to Google and type in cognitive thought distortions, and you will come up with about 10 or 15 thought distortions that are common to all of us. And you can work on those thought distortions and challenge yourself every time they make you feel sad or angry. Behavioral activation is where you're lying in bed with depression or anxiety, unable to do anything. And we advise that the day before you write out some schedules for yourself, maybe 2 or 3 things that you absolutely want to achieve. Don't overload yourself, just get 1 or 2 or 3 done. Give yourself a check for every one you do. And before long, you will be on your way to your normal energetic self. And we also, if you have a therapist, they will train you in how to relax your muscles through either deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation or other forms of calming yourself. And I'm sure Dr. Effa Hesse, Prof. Hesse will talk about prayer and meditation and how you can use those to calm your fears. There's also acceptance and commitment therapy where, yes, you might have a flashback. Yes, you might go back and think about the abuse and be completely upset and hurt. It's okay. Like Dr. Atta said, it's a normal response to trauma. And so you experience the sadness, the anxiety, the depression. You tell yourself, this will not kill me. This too shall pass. And then you commit your time and efforts to activities that are consistent with personally meaningful values. And so you're not just sitting doing nothing. Visit friends if it gives you joy. Cook for an older person if that makes you happy. Bake. Exercise. Please exercise, because that releases some very good happy hormones in your system and helps you to overcome the sadness. And then you build resilience and independence. And the show on Asasi Radio called Beautiful Minds is all about building resilience. And you can get the issues on Facebook. Asasi Radio 99.5, and you can click on the videos and you will get a whole slew of beautiful minds on building resilience. Now, all that, think about all the things that used to strengthen you before the abuse. It's sometimes difficult to have a memory of life before the abuse, but I encourage you to go back and remember the happy times, not with this person necessarily, but with all the other people in your life. And remember that there was once a life and there will be a life again. The spirituality aspect, for those of us that are spiritual, Prof will again talk about that. Letting go of toxicity. Just Ekua seem to have done it so well. Our survivors seem to have done it so well. And so I'll take you back to your thoughts. I'll take you to rituals of cleansing. People have rituals of cleansing. They go to church. They go to confessionals. I urge you to do that if that's part of your being. Washing off, even getting your friends to help you wash off the sadness and the the misery of the past. And there was a question about forgiving in the chat. Absolutely. Letting go of toxicity means forgiving, just like Ekua seems to have done. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiving doesn't mean going back home. If the person has not gone for help themselves, if you haven't seen a change, if you don't, and the importance of letting time pass and envisioning and getting to know this person again before you even think of going back. So, and it's, what about the future? It's really important to go back to your dreams. Ekua did. She went back to school, envision it, plan for it, break it down to small steps, and then begin the process of setting up a new life for yourself and for your family, your children. Get a trusted guide, a friend, a counselor, a therapist. Hold on one day at a time and actively work on your healing. It won't come naturally, normally, without you helping it along. And just remember to avoid toxic relationships. And then you have to put closure to this. You can't go through life, experiencing the abuse over and over again in your mind. So begin to ask, what do healthy relationships look like? Can I be assertive? And in the beginning, you might be over assertive, but it's okay. You will self-correct and come back to a middle way of letting people know what your boundaries are, what you will not accept from anybody, and you yourself, what you will be prepared to walk away from. Learn conflict resolution skills, learn some new communication skills, and do not give up on establishing new and healthy relationships, should there be one in the future. And as our president says, this too shall pass. Trust the Lord will bring some sweetness into your life again. Thank you.
Right. That's lovely. Thank you so much. I do like the last bit that you added on there, Professor Angie of Furyata. Thank you so much. We have a few questions, which I'm going to try and get through, and then we can sort of move ourselves on. So someone is asking here, what is the role of forgiveness in recovery?
Oh, the forgiveness is not for the person you are forgiving, please. The forgiveness is for you yourself. You forgive the person in order to let the poison of his or her being wash out of you. Yeah. And, as hard as it is, the Lord, in the Lord's Prayer, he does say that that we should ask for forgiveness as we ourselves forgive others. So I shouldn't be straying into Prof's domains. I'll leave it right there. But the role of forgiveness psychologically is that it leads to healing on our part. It changes the equation. It gives us a lot more control of our own emotions and thoughts, and a lot more control over the relationship that we're leaving. It stops us from thinking of ourselves as victims. And there's a lot of research that shows that physically we're more healthy when we forgive others.
And another one, it says, is it important to get help closer to the time of the trauma or much later?
As soon as possible, get help. As close to the first incident as possible. Because you yourself may not have noticed the red flags, but talking about it with somebody, Ekua, somebody would have said to Ekua, he's cutting you away from your family. Ekua, he wants to leave you completely dependent on him by making sure you don't have any access to money. Ekua, these are red flags. Ekua, it's time to leave. So as soon as possible. Or Ekua, this is a better way to protect yourself from the physical abuse. This is a better way to protect the children, and so on. So it's better to get help quickly and to in the process, strengthen oneself to make the decision to leave.
Yeah. Okay, so there's something, it's a comment, and it says the decision to leave always rests with the victim in the long run, no one else. And this is probably quite following on from what you've been saying, I think.
Mm-hmm. But you see, it's not very easy for, and I don't want to say victim, I want to say the abused person. It's not very easy for the abused person to make the decision. And it's like we've all said, it's the psychological impact of the abuse, it's the emotional impact of the abuse. And that's why it's so important for the abused person to get the support and the help they need as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Okay. And then I'll try and fit in one more. Says, how do you deal with victims who have suffered from a Christian spouse being the perpetrator, who uses biblical scriptures about God, how God hates divorce, to keep you in that position?
It's very interesting, and I would I would love some correction on this. But years ago, there was lots of abuse in Ireland, because it was a very Catholic place, and the abused would go talk to the Catholic fathers, and the Catholic fathers were helpless to do anything about it because they thought, God hated divorce and so on, and so they would try and resolve issues and ask you to go back, and they realized many women were being killed by their spouses. And so I do think that the Roman Catholic Church came out with a very clear something, that abuse was not part of marriage, and that it could then lead to an annulment of the marriage. So we're asked to be good Christian wives, to submit, and to be respectful. But the men are also asked to die, lay their lives down for their wives. Wives are asked to submit, men to lay down their lives for their wives, like Christ laid down his life for the church. So that kind of comment is really a disservice to Christianity.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think what you've said is exactly that. It can't be used as an excuse at all for that kind of behavior. Someone's asked, saying, okay, so thanks to Akua for sharing her story. I wonder though, did she ever get professional help? Now, whilst we've been online, I have actually asked her some of the questions. No, she didn't get professional help, which is astonishing actually. But she has said that she will hope to get some counseling before she goes into another relationship, at the very least. So I think, and I'm sure you will agree with me, Professor Furyata, that will be the right thing.
That would be a wonderful thing for her. She's done so well. She did a lot of things right, you know, once she decided to leave. And I really respect the choices she made once she decided to leave. Yeah. And actually, that might have sparked all of the little steps she took, you know.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, Professor Angio Furyata, for all your time in taking all the questions. We're going to move on to the next section, but obviously you're staying with us because as we've gone through, typically the questions are just mounting. So I'm going to move on to Professor Hesse, introduce her. She does her section, and then we will then open it up to the three of you to answer some questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. So our final speaker is Professor Efwa Hesse. Professor Efwa Hesse is the immediate past president of the Wesley Girls All Girls Association here in Ghana, and from the 1969 year group. She received her medical degree from the University of Ghana Medical School in 1976 and is a pediatric surgeon by training, as well as being a medical educator for 33 years in Ghana and internationally. Professor Hesse is also a member of Ghana's Network for Women's Rights, NetRight, and the Domestic Violence Coalition in Ghana. She was involved in getting the Domestic Violence Bill enacted and worked to get the relevant sketches for recording evidence on medical examination. She's currently the president of the Accra College of Medicine, Ghana's leading private medical school located in East Legon, Accra, and is also a part-time lecturer in surgery at the University of Ghana Medical School. Together with her husband, she has been a pre-marital counselor and a marriage counselor for over 25 years. Professor Hesse has been married for 42 years to her husband, a physician who is also a reverend minister in the Presbyterian Church of Ghana. They have 4 adult children, one of whom is an old girl of Wesley Girls in the 2002 year group, and more than a football team of grandchildren by grace. We are delighted you're able to join us, Professor Hesse. Thank you very much. So unfortunately, it looks like Professor Hesse's must be the network. So Professor Hesse, if you can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think you were frozen a little bit, but it seems fine now.
Okay. Yes, and I want to say it's a real privilege to be able to share some thoughts with you, and it's so encouraging to have so many of you join us in these important webinars. The previous speaker, everything, and I hope you forgive if it seems I am repeating some of what they said, because I do think that some of the things are important and worth repeating. And certainly the story we've heard from the survivor, Akua, has very important lessons for all of us. And her story is remarkable. Although, as many have said in the chat, yes, healing is a process. Now, can take a long time. But so long as you are engaged in the process, whatever help you need, you can get. There are many, many sources of help. Equia was able to do it strengthened by her faith, but others would need others to help encourage them. And we are here to try and get everyone to avail themselves of all the help that is available. So I will start with sharing. And we'll look at these various points in my outline. The baggage, coming out, letting go, putting yourself on the agenda, how to let go of the past, closeness, then the children, and then maybe some recommendations. So, as has been said, what do you come out with? You come out with a lot of hurt. And the mental emotions in themselves can then manifest in physical ailments, different kinds of things, chronic pain. Dr. Atta mentioned sleeplessness, anxiety, loss of appetite. For some people, overeating could also be a manifestation, and then depression in different degrees. So, as we have said, you're coming out with a lot of baggage. And there is the need for you to be able to trust again. If you have faith, you have that to fall back on, because God would have been within you throughout your ordeal. You have to look at the truth that it could have been a lot worse. If you remember, there's an illustration where somebody is walking on a beach. And the question is, they're asking God, how come you say you're with me, but I only see one set of footsteps? How come I did not see yours? And God said, I was holding you, which is why there was just one set of footsteps. So that faith, that God you have to fall back on, is the one who will help you out throughout this coming out and this ordeal. Having scripture that you can hold on to. Because one of the things the perpetrators or the abusers do is make you feel as if you are not worth anything. So your self-esteem is very low. There are scriptures which you can hold on to. Psalm 139 verse 14. God is the one who made you. And he says, you are wonderfully and fearfully made. So if you are, have that confirmation by the author of creation, yes, somebody can say what they want. But as you have come out of that situation, go back and keep to yourself those scriptures. And there are many more scriptures in the Bible that can affirm you and help you recover your self-esteem. You should allow yourself to feel again. It's okay to be angry. You can express it. It's okay to be fearful, but it's also then good to know that the worst is over and there is hope going forward. Putting yourself on the agenda. Now, I like this illustration because I can forgive but cannot forget. This statement from our experience in marital counseling has been the undoing for many, because here is this chap who is hanging on the cliff edge. He's holding to this huge ball of grudges that he has against this person. And look at the effort he has to put in to be able to hold on to that, not drop it off. So in the end, he's harming himself Forgiving, you drop it, is, as Angie said, for the abused, for the individual. Because every time you remember what has happened, your emotions get all stirred up, your blood pressure shoots up, your internal equilibrium is all in disarray. So you have to learn self-compassion. You have to learn, you need to put yourself first as you learn to love yourself again, because you've been told so many negative things that they're just reverberating in your mind all the time. You've been told you are not worthy. You've been abused. You've been insulted. So you need to go back to forgiving the person as well as forgiving yourself, and learning to put yourself back on the agenda and to let go. So you try not to focus on the negative thoughts. Fill your mind with things that are good. Philippians 4 says, whatever is true, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Scripture has it. Other people use deliberate methodologies they call mindfulness. You can do it if you are like me. I like singing. I sing all the time. Praise singing. Being gentle with yourself. In fact, developing a positive defiance of all the negative things that were said. I was told this, the Bible says, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and therefore I affirm it. I state it. I claim it. So the positive words of God about you, being the head and not the tail. Also, I put here that if you're waiting for the offender to apologize, you may be waiting a long time. Don't make that a condition, either for forgiveness or for you moving on. Then we've talked about the social support. Yes, initially, many abused persons are reluctant to allow others to get close to them. Sometimes it's because they have been threatened. It's because of the threats that have been hanging over their head. But the actual act of hugging others in itself releases some positive hormones in the body that contribute to healing and to regeneration. So that is really key. So you're talking about social networks, just like OGA is. Parents who understand. And sometimes you need to move out from your usual circles, if that is where you are not finding this kind of closeness, to getting into newer circles where you may find such relationships that may help you with experiences of others, with other counselors, which may help you to then heal from the abuse. Then children. A question was raised about what Ekuya said to her 5-year-old who had reported to the teacher. She didn't tell us precisely, but she did say that she spoke to them when they asked questions, which were few, in an age-appropriate conversation, and that is key. You should never, and children move on, but a lot of them may hold onto the idea that perhaps they were to blame for some of what happened in the abusive situation. And this may be things that they would take on to adulthood, and always trying to erase themselves and pretend that they're not even there, so that nobody will see them, nobody will see what they're doing, and so nobody will blame them for anything that could happen to somebody else. So in remembering, it's important to remember what has happened, the history. It's very important to remember. You shouldn't suppress the remembrance. Jifa says it can trigger other emotions, and some of these can be transferred onto these children. They should never have the emotions you're feeling transferred against the offender, transferred onto them. So it's important that when you're talking about this other person, to look at what the person has done and to critique that rather than make them out to be a bad person. So they may have done bad things. It does not make them bad people, especially when it has to do with the children's father or mother. You should continue to shield your children from the negative things that can happen. If you're in a situation where the law in itself actually promotes and actualizes the rights of the child and what is in the supreme interest of the child, then you should never be afraid or ashamed to ask for help. Never be ashamed to ask for help. Now, socialization. We've all been brought up in different cultures. Different cultures have different ideas about the roles of males and females. We may come into a relationship with what we are bringing from our various socializations. So that may influence what happens within a relationship. But going forward, how are we as ladies, and there's some gentlemen on, socializing our children in this day and age? Are we confining specific roles only to one gender? Who are the role models in their lives? What are we modeling to them? There's been talk about the perpetrators or the abusers requiring, Ekuya said her husband refused to go for anger management. But how are we managing anger in ourselves and our children? When we see them throwing tantrums, what do we do? What do they see as mentoring for them? What are they seeing us? How are they seeing us treating the people around us? Our house help, our drivers, our gardeners, the vendors we deal with. What are we modeling to our children? Even now, even though we may not have been in an abusive situation ourselves. So within the church, one of the things that we have tried to do is to emphasize that in as much as a lot of attention is paid to training girls to be good wives, the churches need to work around, and the Christian groups, not just the church, but the Christian groups need to work around to be good husbands. And I've been excited to see one or two such seminars starting. Then, for those who are not yet married, because there was a post, I believe, about a question that there are different age groups in the audience now. Pre-marital counseling, and even for a queer going forward. In the future, there may be another relationship for her, but going forward, structured pre-marital counseling is a very good foundation for both individuals in any relationship. The institution of marriage was instituted by God, and He has a blueprint for it. There are a lot of things that are said about the blueprint which are not what God said in the Word of God. So if you don't know what God said, you can easily be bamboozled into thinking that indeed that was part of the blueprint. And at premarital counseling, a lot of all these issues are brought up. You go through looking at the abuse in the past of each individual in the relationship. That is considered to be baggage in the new relationship. We're all coming from different environments, bringing on our own baggage. And in premarital counseling, you are taken through steps to see that past as abuse, as a baggage, and to work on releasing that baggage so you are free from it and correcting before you start a new relationship. So as we talked about red flags in the first seminar, premarital counseling will bring out the red flags. As you go through the structured syllabus, you will see the red flags. That is the point at which you say, this relationship is not for me. So as Angie said, Angela Dramna Boaje said in the first seminar, you will walk into love, not fall into love. Then, as well as premarital counseling, there's counseling that can continue after the marriage when there are issues that raise themselves. As soon as they happen, look for help, because married persons who are having challenges can be helped through with further counseling. At that point, if there are still major issues or one partner is not willing to change, then there are clear steps that should be gone through. One of which will be separation for a time whilst the counseling continues. So, as we've all said, Angela said it, Jifa said it, it shall all come to pass, and there will be an end for it. One of the things we talk about during premarital counseling is finances, because finances are a big problem in a lot of marital relations. We also deal with how to resolve conflicts, because just as, you know, boxers, when they go into the boxing ring, there are rules. You don't hit below the belt. So in marriage, resolving conflicts, in handling conflicts, there are rules. You don't hit below the belt. There are certain things you don't do. And each partner within that relationship during the process of premarital counseling is helped to deal with how they resolve conflicts, or how together they can resolve conflicts, which will not end up in them building walls between them, where you emphasize the offense and not the offender, because everybody reacts negatively when somebody points a finger at them, but maybe not so negatively when what you have done is what is critiqued. So the important thing is, don't despair. There is help. You don't have to face it alone. APS Hackman has this advice. He says, God is a gentle surgeon. You can trust him to take your brokenness and make you whole. Only God can take the broken pieces and make them beautiful. So spending time in the Word of God when you're out and trying to heal allows the Holy Spirit to transform your heart and your mind. So even from an abused situation, the end is in sight. You can heal. You are destined to bounce back even stronger. Take a testimony. Thank you all.
Wow, thank you, Prof. What a powerful way to end your lecture. And I think I would say that all three speakers ended on a very positive note. Professor Angela mentioned that there's a sweet relationship ahead. Professor Ifwa is saying that you would bounce back even stronger with a testimony. And Dr. Jifa talked about the fact that, yes, you can heal. It may take time, but healing would definitely happen. So this is a really wonderful way to end the lectures themselves. And there are loads of questions to go through. And so, Prof, I want to thank you very much for availing yourself and putting a gospel or Christian twists to all of this, that God is a healer, and anybody going through something like this would come out at the end stronger than they went in before. So we really, really appreciate that. And so I'm going to start the questions, and I'll be alternating with my co-host. One of the things that came up is somebody asked the question that, what if somebody is going through all this, but they don't seem to find the strength to empower themselves for all these things, these nice things that you have mentioned? What if you know what if you know all of this? In other words, you've understood all this unhealthy relationship stuff, you've left a toxic situation, but you find yourself unable to empower yourself enough to feel whole and complete again. And I know that today it's not just our three speakers. Mr. Adolphe Wukubekwing is still on the panel with us. Dr. Foster has joined us. We thank him for that. Dr. Angela Dramina Abuaje has also joined us, and Dr. Jifa is also here. So any of you can take it. What if you don't feel like you have enough strength to feel whole and complete again?
Well, I think let me try and take that. I think it's not unusual that you feel that way, and I think that's why we've emphasized that you need some sort of support. Granted, even if we're not talking about trauma, definitely when you're going through challenges, you need to be able to draw on some sort of support. So you'd realize that with the survivor's story, she got some sort of support from a friend. So there are certain people that you kind of look up to. And one of the things that is helpful is you building a network, you know, of support, identifying people that can actually support you through this process. I know, I think I'm seeing comments of people saying, well, we know all of this, but still it's a difficulty. And we talk about the church, you know, failing and all of that. That is why there are other sources of support that you can actually go to kind of guide you through the process. And as we're saying, it's not simple. It's a bit complex. That's why you need all the help that you can get. So some of it is looking outside, right? So for instance, of course, the church is there. Many people have found healing through spiritual resources, but then also you have therapists that can also help you through and guide you. And one of the things that is helpful during therapy is that during those processes, you're taught how to cope. You're taught how to regulate some of the emotions, some of the difficulties, that feeling that you think that you'll not be able to deal with it. You are empowered, right? Where you can regain yourself, where you can regain your self-esteem to be able to deal with some of these difficulties. And Beth, I think you are muted, so we can't hear you.
Yes, I am. I said thank you. I said whoever asked that question, which is reflective of a lot of people, I hope that answers. It says, Dr. Jifa says get lots of support from church, from formal counselors, or anybody that can help you. So thank you for answering that question. There's a question from Ms. D here that says the abused person bounced back and unfortunately has been going through emotional challenges about separation, like they're experiencing anxiety about the separation itself. What should they do?
I can only say that giving themselves time. This person, although an abuser, has been in their lives, and they have a history, they have a relationship of sorts, they may even have some pleasant memories together. And and so, like Jifa says, it's natural that they might feel like they should go back, maybe things will work out and so on. But it's important to give yourself time to heal, and time to see clearly again, and get the support, do other things, reconnect with safe friendships, and get your life back together. There's so much more going on around you once you open your eyes to them, and once you get some good friends to hold your hands through this difficult time. Give yourself time to heal.
Thank you. It's time to...
Thank you very much. Adolf here, if I may, and thank you, Professor Furyata. That was very amazing. Separation, I think there is some ambiguous loss here. We are not mourning enough. You know, when you are bonded with someone, I think that when there is separation, there is a loss. But the difficulty is that the person is not dead, but there is something that you've lost, and yet you're unable to grieve. The most difficult thing is losing someone who is present. It puts you in an ambiguous situation. And so what I suggest to my, my clients is to recognize the fact that when you are going through abuse, there is some aspect of your life, some aspect of a relationship that you lose, and it is a loss. And it presents with all the things that people, when you lose someone you love, you go through. And so there's time for mourning the loss, owning up to the loss and mourning, you know. And I think a therapist can help you deal with that ambiguous loss. The person is there by you've lost him, you've lost her, but he's there. It is very important that we look at that.
Any other? All right. Thank you, Mr. Adolf. I'll go to the next question. It says, how do we view singleness? Do you believe that we exchange the gift of singleness for the gift of marriage? Have we in society elevated marriage above singleness? I think that's an important question.
Okay, maybe I can say a little bit about that. Actually, yes, there are many instances in the Bible when Paul is talking and he says that, yes, the intent was for marriage, but some were destined to be eunuchs. Some were destined to be single. So yes, there is a role for people.
Prof, I think we've lost your sound. Well, let's hope our sound comes back. Prof Sahese. I think in the interest of time, I would have her address a question when she comes back, but maybe we'll take another question. Is it okay to live closer to the abuser after you've been separated, mainly for child contact? please.
I think well, sometimes they in England, for instance, I know that they may just, if there's abuse, they might just advise you not to be close, or to cease any kind of contact until there is whatever, a proper separation, or until they're sure that you're safe or the children are safe. I think security and safety are the issues. If you live close and there can be security for the abused, then okay. But if distance is needed to help keep the peace, I would say, at least until the person who's been abused has regained a sense of themselves and their confidence and so on, being where they're not reminded of the abuser is a good thing, if it is possible and practical.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question on finances, and I think it played out in Ikuya's situation where her husband wanted to know how much she was, what was in her account. And the question seemed to have gone. It talked about.
Yeah, I saw it.
It says that it sounds like one of the.
Hello, Beth, I'm back.
Oh, okay. So did you want to finish answering your question?
Yes. I was saying that there are many examples where Paul talks about some being eunuchs, or some being born eunuchs, and some being made eunuchs. So this, we seem to have, at least as a cultural thing, push towards making everybody has to get married. But it become used to. Can you hear me?
Yes, you went off.
Can you hear me?
You went off briefly, but
the more independent, the longer you leave it, the more independent you have become, and you've become used to a way of living. So when you have two people who have become used to their way of living, wanting to come together in one relationship, it needs much more work before you can be sure that you are in the right place. And there should not be the pressure of you must get married, you must get married, you must get married, which will push you into a relationship that you're already not. Then the question on finances, maybe I'll give the example. We've been married for 42 years. It's been a lot of smiles, a lot of the way, but there have been challenges. And like I said, learning to fight clean, during conflict. But one decision we both made, you see, trust in a relationship is very important. You need to know your partner and how far you can trust them. We, ever since we got married, have had one joint account. We had separate accounts before we got married. We've had one joint account since we got married. Everything goes into it. And together we plan how it's being used. It doesn't matter who our signatories are, anyone to sign. You have to have a relationship of trust. If you don't trust the other person, it will not work. And finances have been the bone of contention of a lot of conflicts and breakups in marriages. So it's an issue that you have to clear up and talk about before you get married. And as we have said, if a young man comes up and says, oh, I'm going to look after you, I don't want you to do any work, you'll have to probe a little bit more, because we are in a different era from what our mothers and grandmothers mothers used to be in. Now, everybody is educated. So what did I go to school to do or to become? If I have dreams, I have to also be allowed to follow my dreams. And all these issues have to be probed and understood and fully agreed on, ideally before the relationship starts. Because as was mentioned before, Adolf mentioned in the first speaker, they could then constitute red herrings that you should look out for because they could lead to problems later. I don't know if that helps.
Okay, I mean, that was very helpful. I just don't know if you have an idea of what percentage of Ghanaian families or married couples who do it the way you have versus those who keep theirs separate. Is there any data?
One of the things that you remember is that in our culture, in some cultures, the woman, when she goes into marriage, is supposed to bring everything to go and get wealth to bring back to her family. He also has a family. So who's going to take care of his family? And in premarital counseling, structured premarital counseling, this is one of the issues we discuss. And you both have to come to some agreement as to how it's going to work before you will sort of be signed off. I mean, there are ways of doing it. You can have separate, some people have separate accounts. They agree, you pay for this, you pay for that. It works for them, that's fine. But you need trust. If you don't have trust in the relationship, it's not going anywhere fast.
Thank you very much.
Add something little to it, if you don't mind, very quickly. I think that we're talking about this, the usual situation where, premarital counseling looks at how do we deal with finances, and people have built a relationship of trust and they are, acting on what they have learned and so on. It's very good. But where there is abuse in the relationship and it's focusing around financial abuse, it's a very different sort of situation because this person is using economic strategies or means to actually control, manipulate, suppress, or take away from you something that should belong to you or to the both of you. So then again, it means that for those who want to help in these issues, treating people who have disagreements around finances in terms of what kinds of responses you give them will be very different from when somebody is actually using financial means or financial strategies to abuse another person, deny them of what may be also rightfully theirs, and actually using it as a tool of punishment in a sense. So it's just a bit of a distinction that we need to draw.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Angela. I'm going to kindly ask all the panelists if you can also look at the Q&A section and answer some of the questions. That would be great. I'm going to pick two of them that seem to have a similar trend. One of them has to do with children. It's saying that, do any of the panelists offer counseling to children? At what age could children be counseled? And the other question that has come up is that when you leave a potentially abusive relationship, but the person continues to defame you to people you have dealings with, and it's affecting all spheres of your life, do you have any recourse in the law? And does this play out in Ghana? So the first one was about children.
Yes, I see children, but I'm more comfortable with children, say from age 7, 8 to their late teens. I really enjoy that span. So yes, I do see them. I know Dr. Atta has developed some a way of talking with children who have experienced trauma. So I think she can even go to a much lower age. So yes, we do offer those services.
Okay, thank you. We're trying to be sensitive to the fact that there's probably going to be a national broadcast soon, but today we knew that we may have to extend a little bit. It's 4 minutes to time. I'm going to let Dr. Samantha, Mrs. Samantha Proja, go through some of the questions so that I can scan the rest of them and see if I can put them in a concise manner. What's going to happen next is I will have each of the panelists give a conclusion words. That is after we do the questions, give their concluding remarks. Mrs. Samantha Proja will give a summary. And then after that, we'll have Mrs. Jeanette Kwakupum, the Vice President of the Old Girls Association, give a vote of thanks, and I'll give the final words and we'll end, just to give you an idea of how things are going to pan out. So Samantha, if you can pick up some of the questions while I scroll through to make sure we haven't
missed anything. Yes. Okay. So,
and then before you do that, there's a question that Dr. Jifa Abrahata said he would like to. What if you are depending on the perpetrator for your source of livelihood? How do you deal with such a story? Dr. Jifa, were you willing to answer it?
Okay, that's fine. So again, I think we've talked about this quite a lot. The fact that you are dependent on the perpetrator also puts you at a disadvantage. But if you recall the survivor's story, you see she gradually worked herself up. She improved upon her education and all of that. So that is something that you have to do and possibly wean yourself off. In terms of if you're depending upon the perpetrator, say for finances, there must be some support that you can get from elsewhere. It could be family, it could be church, it could be close friends, as you gradually are able to develop yourself where you become independent. And I think those also bring to fore the discussions that we need to start having quite early enough, where you don't need to depend upon somebody, where that person may take advantage. So it's about being able to wean yourself off by looking for alternative sources of support.
Okay, just to add a bit, I also think that it is important to plan your exit. Now, if you realize exiting immediately is going to be difficult for you financially, you could plan it. Always making sure that you are safe in the relationship. If safety considerations are such that you cannot continue to stay in the relationship, you better exit. But where you think you are safe, you need to plan it. Planning means asking yourself, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? What are the resources that I'm going to depend on? So that you are not so much disempowered, such that you are always looking back to the abuser for help. So plan it. I know people who have taken 2 years to plan. By the time they were ready to go, all their suitcases, wardrobes were there, but they were empty. They just picked their bag and they were gone. They had planned, know where to go, they've rented a place, they have found alternative livelihoods, and they were gone. So living is not an event, it is a process guided by safety consideration.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Adolf Owukubekwe. Right, so as Dr. Ayi says, we're slightly pressed for time, but we're going to just keep on going at this stage. So the other question on here is, how do you deal with the witnesses of the abuse who shirked their responsibility of speaking up? How do you encourage all of us to speak up if something looks wrong? And could I ask that of Dr. Angela Dramina-Boaji, if you're still online, that is.
Yes, I am. Okay. Well, what do we do with people? I've always maintained that abuse is a hydra-headed issue. If you're looking at unhealthy relationships and you're looking at abuse, it means also it's multi-dimensional. And even though the survivor has to take different kinds of steps, including psychoeducation, this and that and that, the rest of us have a responsibility to be committed to working on this. Some of us can do it at church, some can do it in our schools, some with our families, some in communities and villages, some at the governmental level, and it's when these things get spoken about, when you challenge people about their thinking about these things, when you refuse to be silent, when you see these things happening and you educate people wherever you are, that's how you get to break the silence. That's how you also empower people who are caught up in it to speak, because they know that there is some support in the system. So this is about commitment, really, and you need an army of volunteers to be able to get people actually developing the kind of courage and empowerment to speak about these things.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now, there's another one here. It says, what if your family is not a very good support system and you become the villain, even though you are the abused? Does anyone come across this? Mr. Adolf Aukubekwe, I'm going to throw this at you. What if you suddenly find that you become the villain, even though you're the abused? Have you seen this at all?
Please repeat the question.
Okay, so the question says, what if your family is not a very good support system, and so you then become the villain, even though you are the abused? And I'm asking you, have you actually seen a situation like that?
Yes, especially where the children are used as a bargaining chip. Okay, the couple, each one try to have the children on their side. And especially where the mother is not resourceful, the abuser then bribe the children with showering them with gifts. So they go to the side of the father. And what I have come to experience is that mothers are very strict with their times and discipline. Okay, so anytime there is an issue in the relationship, the fathers try to relax the rules and indulge the children, and therefore they move. That is at the nuclear level. At the extended family level also, you could have relatives really also on the side of the abuser, leaving you alone. But the most important thing is your life. They will come to appreciate you later on, but you've got to be alive. So it doesn't matter who is on your side. Are you on your side? You, the one in question, do you value your life such that you are prepared to be your own support? Other help failing. Okay, so I recommend that be your own support. If you look forward to help and it's not coming, be your own support. In due course, your position will be vindicated, but you've got to be alive first. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's an interesting question here, and I'm just going to try and read it, and then we'll see. So it says here, do you agree that there is a gradual and systematic breakdown of our traditional family values and setup in place of woke and very leftist ideals? Now, I don't know, and then the person says, how do you deal with a situation where a woman takes undue advantage of the overtly feminine leaning legal systems that are at play against married men today? I mean, that is a loaded question, but I'm saying that it might be an idea for us to look at it, because it's the other side of the coin to a certain degree. So am I coming back to you, Mr. Okubekwe, or will somebody else pick this up?
Angela, Jamna Boaji and Prof. Furyata could come in to the rescue.
Thank you for nominating.
Adolf, you're in trouble. Prof, can you go ahead of me, my namesake, and then I will try
my dear namesake. This one, what do you do with people who are manipulating the system? That's the question, isn't it?
Essentially.
People who are manipulating the system in order to, for their own benefit, for whatever reason. So they might come in and try and manipulate the caregivers or the lawyers or whatever, or the government officials. I mean, in places like in England, the welfare state and so on. And I think that there are enough of them, and they've happened enough times that experienced counselors might be able to see through, and experienced social workers and so on see through the manipulation and hone in on the impact on the family unit, and therefore treat the family unit rather. But the legal system, you are, for good reason, is more on women's side, because it's women who tend to get the brunt of the aggression. But this is the hope I hold out, that in a very short time, experienced professionals are able to see through the manipulation. Angie, help me out here, please.
You've done very well, Prof. I think I read the question myself and I was asking, abuse is not left nor right. We have a problem we are facing, and it's been a man's world for a long time. And that's not to say or trivialize men being abused. It just means this is the reality we have faced. And if you're like me, who is a Christian, from the fall, you know, that we have relationships that are skewed with power on a certain side, but that doesn't mean that person who is even being powerful is free. But it just happens that culturally they have more power. And so it's been a man's world. And it's not surprising that it's women particularly, and then also children that get abused in this situation. So abuse is not left nor right. And it's painful sometimes when people try to bracket things or compartmentalize them, and then it sort of breaks down the discourse in terms of being able to look at a particular situation, look at the case, examine the evidence and say, wrong is wrong, and let's do something about it. Lastly, yes, I believe what Prof. Angie said, people are trained, generally speaking, in many places, they are trained to pick evidence. They are trained to do social inquiry. They are trained to do investigation. They're trained, I mean, I've done this work for a long time. Of course, at a certain point, if somebody is being manipulative, I can sort of pick it up sometimes. And yes, as part of the work, you can confront it. You know, confronting is not about fighting with the person, but it's about leading them to what you believe is more probable than what they're saying. And so with that, the hope is that people pick up these things and are able to place the help where it is. But let's face it, anytime the world is trying to correct something that has gone on for a long time, the tendency to go swing to the other side in a sharp way is also present. That's why I'm not surprised that in some jurisdictions, people would go to, there's a fight, there's a call, and the moment the police get there, they pick up the man. You know, whether the man threw the frying pan or the woman threw it, they just pick up the man. Why? Because we are coming from a certain dynamic. It may be unfair, but that's the world trying to correct something that is wrong. And sometimes it veers off a little bit. But we must recognize there has been a wrong. and how do we correct it and do it in such a way that we're also able to protect those who suffer, and then and ensure some justice is done one way or the other. So that would be, I'm sorry I've been long about it, but it's that kind of question that gets you thinking. So thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add to it with a comment that Nikki's made on here. She said the legal system in the UK relies on evidence. It's difficult to get that evidence where the perpetrator is very careful, and social workers often get it wrong. Men also get abused too and fail to report it out of shame. So I'm guessing that sort of comes in line with what you were just saying. There's another question here. So what do you do in a situation where work has invariably separated you two, and thoughts and examples of the abuse of infidelity and the host of lies keep flooding into your thoughts first thing in the morning and periodically throughout the day? Sometimes you're filled with different kinds of emotions, anger, pain, pity, and you even miss the person. Professor Angela, I think are you taking this question?
Oh, I can, but I'm sorry. Tell me again what was the question again?
Oh, sorry, it's because you sort of popped up, so I wondered whether you'd sort of either put your hand up. It says, what do you do in a situation where work has invariably separated the two of you, and thoughts and examples of the abuse of infidelity and the host of lies keep flooding into your thoughts first thing in the morning and periodically throughout the day? And then sometimes you're filled with different kinds of emotions, anger, pain, pity, and you even miss the person. It's a slightly interestingly worded question. If the person is still on here, please forgive me, because I don't want to interpret your question in any other way other than I thinking it's someone who's probably been through a whole load of stuff. And I think either stepping away, but they're missing the person, but they feel anger, they feel pain, they feel pity. You do, it says, in a situation like that?
I think Prof. Efwa Hesse talked about the importance of trust in a relationship, and how difficult it is without trust. And when trust is broken, especially through infidelity, then there needs, for the relationship to be healed, there needs to be a reassessment and a commitment to a faithful relationship. And if there is none, then it's no wonder that these images and sorrows and so on, and then adults' issue of, okay, so you have to grieve the loss, you have to mourn for the loss of the relationship, and over time, again, time heals all. That if there is no recommitment to the relationship over time, the pain will reduce, the blaming and everything will reduce, and the person will be able to move on. So if the relationship died, and there's the experience of grief and loss and mourning, and these are important cycles that we go through in our lives, in our relationships. So building trust again takes time. It takes being together. It takes recommitting if there is the zeal to do that. Otherwise, it's a mourning and a grieving.
Professor Angio Furyata, thank you so much. And I'm going to take this opportunity to thank you, because I know you're going to have to leave us. at this stage. But thank you so much for your time, for everything that you've helped us with throughout the entire series. So you're getting your special thank you before, because I know you're going now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe, Samantha, I can say just a little bit. The issue of trust, yes. Rebuilding trust is not an easy thing, and it's not an overnight thing. It's a gradual thing. The other person has to gain back the confidence that they had in you initially. It can be a long process, and it has to be consistent. You have to be willing to be an open book for the person to see that indeed, things have changed. It may have been suspicion, but there must have been something that may have led them to believe that. So it's always going to be a work that has to continue throughout the relationship, throughout any relationship. It's something that you have to keep working at, but it's doable.
All right.
Both parties.
Mr. Wukubakwe, were you going to add something to this?
Yes, I mean, I got a bit intrigued with the having fond memories, missing the person. I mean, it's very classic, typical of abuse. Interestingly, it's not only when you are in the relationship that this happened to you, even long after you've exited, if you haven't gone through healing, if you haven't confronted the ghost of your relationship, they come back to haunt you. You cannot sweep trauma under the carpet. When you leave trauma unattended to, they gain currency and power of their own, and they begin to haunt you. So if you've gone through the cycle, remember that the abuser is not always that evil, for that matter. There are moments that you cherish. There are moments that you're never going to forget. But that shouldn't deceive you. At the end of the day, when you net the relationship, what do you want? Are you better off in the abusive relationship, or now that you have exited, you are okay? The good memories will come, but in the end, it is all about your well-being. Your well-being and dealing with the residue. That's like healing is a journey. You never get done because there are memories that will come up and you've got to deal with them as and when they pop up. The recovery is constantly work in progress. Work in progress. Work as you better yourself and find new meaningful relationships.
Thank you very much. And I think it's worth while me saying this, as we're watching that we understand that there's the president of Ghana is speaking, so we are losing potentially some of our participants. For people who need to, do look in the chat. We've put the YouTube links in there. The YouTube links that are in there are also recordings, so you can go back, because for us it's important that the message gets out there. It's less about the number of participants, it's more about the number of people that do get to hear the overall message that we have. So please do pick up the link from the chat and share it, and for those of you that need to leave, just pick up the link and watch it later. I'm going to hand over back to my co-host, Dr. Bertha Ayi, to see where we are going next.
Okay, maybe we'll just take one or two questions, and then if the presenters can give their final words, we'll ask Dr. Hannah Ayite to give a vote of thanks, and then Ms. Kakutom would also speak, but there's just a couple of let's see. So it's so easy to say leave. Most perpetrators are very devious, and it's, as was said at the beginning of this talk, a lot of women who go through this are educated and strong and not stupid. So leaving when you're in it is difficult to leave. I'm not sure if that requires.
I think it's confirming thoughts, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask the speakers to give their final recommendations or last words. And Dr. Hannah Ayite will do the vote of thanks and presentation of certificates, after which the Vice President of the Old Girls Association would speak, and I'll give my final comments, and we will be done. And I'm going to kindly, once again, ask the panelists, please, 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 we'll keep it short, but after we end the conference, if you can just log back in for a few minutes, we would appreciate it. That way we don't have to meet during the week or next week. Thank you. So speakers, if you have a few last something to summarize for us, that would be great.
Okay, so maybe I'll go first. This is just, I know there's been a lot of talk about it's not easy when you're leaving an abusive relationship. Just for, if there are any survivors out there, just to say that anybody who is struggling to cope with after leaving a relationship or battling with self-doubt, guilt, shame, self-blame, just to let you know that you are not what happened to you, that you can heal and get all the support you need. So just don't stop till you find yourself again. Support is available. Thank you.
All right. If I may also chip in, I think that it is it's very important that we appreciate what a healthy relationship look like. And for me, what I'm picking, there was a question about individual, being an individual, being single, and being a coupleship. I think the two are not mutually exclusive. I believe that a healthy relationship must create space for affirming your individuality in that relationship. Because there are times you are in this relationship and you want to keep to yourself. You want to celebrate something that is unique about yourself. Okay, I think that it's very important that a healthy relationship creates space for the couple to also celebrate their individuality in that relationship. If you are in a relationship and there is no space for that, it must be suffocating. It means that your uniqueness, the uniqueness you bring to the relationship, isn't appreciated much. That would be my first point. The second point will be, I think as we go out there helping, there is something about the politics of women's mental health I want to bring to the discussion. In all the experiences of women, yes, the women at the micro level are going through the experiences they are going through. But at the macro level, the larger ecosystem, there are belief systems, ideologies that are contending against them. And it is very important that we balance the two in order to minimize the guilt, the self-blame that they are going through. So yes, we must address the sociocultural unequal belief system that are producing an equal power relationship in the relationship, so that women, the survivors, will not keep on blaming themselves and be more willing to connect to spaces that affirm them and give them the support that they need in their struggle to assert themselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other final thoughts?
Just to say, I think at the end of it all, it shall come to pass. Healing is possible. Building new relationships are possible. Getting out and finding the support is possible. So anybody who finds themselves in that situation is encouraged to use the resources that are available, wherever you may be, to look for that help. Make sure you don't lose yourself in all that is going on, because you are important. And if there are children in the relationship, you have to be strong. Especially you, the woman, have to be strong for them. So make sure you stay alive, and make sure you heal. And there is healing at the end of it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. At this point, Mrs. Samantha Portia, do you want to give your comments now or wait till after the vote of thanks?
It's fine. I think we need Dr. Hannah to do her thing first, and then I'll follow her.
Thank you.
There's Dr. Hannah, are you available?
Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to share my screen. Says you cannot start sharing while the other participant is sharing.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen, Dr.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, so on behalf of the Wesley Girls High School Old Girls Association, the webinar committee, I'd just like to say, first of all, thank the Lord for giving this opportunity to be able to have a 3-part series on unhealthy relationships. What a great webinar series we have had so far. I also wish to say a profound thank you to our speakers who graciously accepted the offer to partake in all 3 webinars. They painstakingly prepared and shared the expertise with participants of the webinars. The feedback has been excellent. We are most grateful and very appreciative of you all. So I would like to, on behalf of the Wesley Girls High School Old Girls Association and the webinar committee, presents the certificate of appreciation to ASP Dr. Foster Naniwato for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Thank you, Dr. Foster Naniwato. Dr. Foster, are you around? Okay. Once again, I'd like to present this certificate on behalf of the Old Girls Association to Very Reverend Ama Afubli. We know she's one of us, but this is something we are doing to show how much we appreciate her for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Thank you very much, Very Reverend Ama Afubli. Mr. Adolf Ewuku Bekweng, Certificate of Appreciation from Wesley Girls High School, OGA Webinar Committee for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Thank you very much, Mr. Ewuku Bekweng. To Dr. Angela Dramina Abwaji, Certificate of Appreciation from Wesley Girls High School Old Girls Association. This is presented to you for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Thank you very much, Dr. Dramina Abwaji. I know I can't see you receive them, but I know virtually you have accepted the certificate. They'll be sent to you later on by the team. Certificate of Appreciation for Honorable Diana Asunaba Dapa. Thank you very much for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationship. We are very grateful. To Dr. Jifa Abrahata for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Wesley Girls High School Old Girls Association say a very big thank you to you. Professor Angio Furyata, I know you have left us, but this is to say we are very grateful for your time and commitment to the webinar series. God bless you. And finally, to Professor Ifwa Hesse, thank you very much, former president, for your time and commitment to the webinar series on dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Thank you very much. We know our signature and date are absent for now, but those will be done on the official ones. So thank you very much, everyone. Yes, thank you very much. God bless you. Thank you, moderators. Excellent.
All right, thank you. At this point, we'll invite, thank you so much, Dr. Hannah, for doing this. We really appreciate it. We're going to invite Mrs. Jeanette Kwakupom, who is the Vice President of the Old Girls Association, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very clearly.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm doing this on behalf of the national president, Ife Simpson, who is unable to make a few remarks, so bear with me. But all I can say really is, as the French would say, tout est bien qui finit bien. All is well that ends well. So much knowledge, so much information, and such an array of impressive speakers. Really, we couldn't have had it any better. My thanks is very short. It goes to the dynamic webinar team, the committee that pulled this entire program through. 3 solid Sundays of wonderful messages and important presentations. You've done a yeoman's job. And Mrs. Samantha Prosser and Dr. Bertha, that's what I normally call you, Dr. Bertha Ayi, we really thank you for your excellent style in moderating. It's been fantastic. Indeed, the certificates have been signed and the hard copies are available at the Secretariat. In the coming week, we will call up the resource persons, the recipients of these certificates, and ask them to tell us exactly where they would want us to deliver their certificates, and the Secretariat will do that. I thank you all very much. I know that there is more to come from the webinar committee, but we are really grateful to the entire team for pulling this through. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mrs. Kwakupon, for that appreciation. And so my co-moderator, Mrs. Samantha Proja, will say a few words. And if there's no other matters, I would also end with concluding remarks, and we'll stop the YouTube live presentation and just regroup briefly.
Okay, so we've now come to the end of the session and of the webinar series on the dynamics of unhealthy relationships. Over the last 3 weeks, we've covered a wide area, including red flags, how to get help, and finally today, how to heal. Our speakers have been fantastic and our audience has engaged really, really well in all aspects. This has not been an easy topic to tackle and may well have left some people feeling maybe quite uncomfortable. However, some have found their voices through the Q&A sections. We've seen that by asking questions, commenting, and giving brief accounts of incidents. We have learned about some crucial signs, the red flags. They may seem obvious to some, but many are not that obvious. We should now be in a better position to recognize those signs, whether it's happening to us or to someone close to us. We've also learned today about the healing process and what that entails. Hearing a survivor's story on how she got through her situation should give us some hope. And it's important for us to know that there is some help out there. So we're aware of this sensitive topic and how difficult it may be. So if you need some help, please do contact the Domestic Violence and Victim Support Unit, DOVSU, which is part of the Ghana Police Service. And you can also reach ARC Foundation and all the other lists, the names of the various resources that can be used. They were on a link that was up on the screen a minute ago. Again, I also have to say thank you to our wonderful speakers. It's been great working with them over the last 3 weeks. Thank you to the Wesley Girls High School All Girls Association for supporting this webinar series, and especially to the webinar committee, and in particular to Ama Engman, Anawa Bru, Dr. Hannah Aite Ani, Gipsy Emisa, Irabne Akiwami, and Sheila Arthur. And finally, a huge thank you to you, our audience, once again for taking the time to join us. Some of you have been here with us for each and every session. And we sincerely hope that you have found this series helpful. And if at the end of this, we have managed to touch some people, then we would have achieved our objective. And judging by some of the feedback we've already received, we have done that. The links to the recordings of today's session, as well as the previous two, are all being shared in the chat below. Thank you very much. And I'll hand over to Dr. Bertha Ayi. It's been a pleasure co-hosting with you, Dr. Bertha, and thank you.
Yes,
It's been a pleasure co-hosting with you as well. And I want to thank you for your amazing organizing abilities and getting everyone on schedule and all that. It's been wonderful. I want to thank all the panelists. We've impacted over 1,000 people. I would say about 50,500 people, just based on the number of people who have viewed the YouTube. And I know it's impacted me. And we've heard many good reports from emails coming in as to how people have been helped just from the information that we shared. And so I want to thank the webinar committee once again, the Old Girls Association. Irabna Akimi was one of the people who kept on saying, you know what, we really need to discuss this. It's a trending topic, it's urgent. I want to thank her. And you've already mentioned the names of those on the committee for all your endless meetings, the thinking through, the reaching out to speakers, and also the fact that the speakers didn't turn us down. So thank you to speakers, Mrs. Giftiemisa, Sheila Arthur, Dr. Hannah Tete, Irabna, Beatrice Anowa. Thank you, Samantha. And so I think we will end at this point. And people have asked us, can we do this more often? I just want to clarify that the webinar committee was not set up for relationships. This happened to be an interesting or trendy topic that we thought would be helpful. And so we did it, but based on the feedback we received, it's likely that we'll do it, probably at least tackle it once a year, but please expect us to come back to you maybe every 2 months or every 3 months with a trendy topic. And you can also suggest something to your executives as well. And we hope you will continue to patronize this. And it's been a wonderful time. Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask the panelists to please rejoin us. And I know this has been a really difficult thing for you to do, spending so many hours with us, but you've done it. And we truly appreciate it. And you all have a wonderful week and a wonderful weekend. Thank you. If we had music, we would play it at the end, but we don't. So bear with us and thank you for joining us. And yes, you can share the recordings on YouTube videos and your WhatsApp and also on your blog site. Mrs. Amelia is asking. I mean, this has been phenomenal, fantastic, really, really fantastic.
Amma, if Amma's still on or Anoa, can we put those links back in again? Because I think they're slightly higher up in the chat. So if we could just, if you just put them all in again, and then those who've been kind enough to remain can pick them up. Thank you.
Okay. I need y'all to run down here. Come on, let me see you. Come on, Jehovah's hand. Jehovah. Show me how to do it, y'all. I believe, right there. I believe. Come on.